to the latest edition of Planted Unearthed. My name's Sam Peters and I'm one of the co-founders of Planted, the first contemporary design show aimed at reconnecting people and spaces with nature. In the second series of Planted Unearthed, we're continuing to explore how design, sustainability, architecture, food production and nature can combine to create cleaner, greener, healthier spaces. We're looking deeper into the issues surrounding access to nature and how to design and create spaces where caring for the environment, consuming responsibly and living sustainably all come naturally. Today we're talking to a man who walked away from his life as an organisational psychologist who travelled the world to establish his own 25-acre rewilding project on the North Wiltshire Dorset border in 2014. Underhill Wood Nature Reserve is now a beautiful natural haven tucked away in the heart of England's farming country, and Jonathan Thomson is the proud protector of everything from barn owls to grass snakes to native British bee colonies. And I'm delighted to welcome Jonathan onto Planted Unearthed today. Jonathan, hello.
Sam, thank you. Very nice. Good introduction, mate. Well done.
Thank you. Well, great to see you, Jonathan. The last time we saw each other was actually at your wonderful reserve down in East Noyle, up in North Dorset. I mean, perhaps we could start off, just tell us a little bit about Underhill. What is it? How did it come about? And why are you investing so much of your life into it?
Okay, let me sort of go back and give a sort of a day one, I guess. So I had for many years I've been sort of around this topic, I guess, for the last 20 years. In fact, it's probably my wife and I, we had a sense that the natural world was sort of under significant pressure and in serious decline. And I've had a sense of that, as I say, pretty much across my life. And we'd got to a point where I didn't need to put on a suit and tie anymore, and I could redirect things, or we could redirect things. And I spent 2 or 3 agonizing years trying to sort of work out what that is, beyond sort of signing endless petitions online. What else could I do? And I sort of like doing things. I don't think I'm a sort of a sort of an online campaigner or anything like that. I like being much more active. As part of my background, I grew up on a dairy farm in New Zealand. So we happened upon this idea through a lot of accidental meetings of buying a piece of land and rewilding it, and so sort of taking direct action in that way. Then the idea around the land, and it's interesting. The sort of missions I had at the beginning haven't changed, and they have stood the test of time. So, for me, there was a lot about bringing young people into this environment and teaching them about nature, teaching them about ecosystems, teaching them about conservation. That's a really active part of what I do. Bringing adults in and doing nature talks pre-COVID, sort of 3 times a year, something like that, roughly, I guess. We would have an ecologist or a nature writer or a conservationist come and do some sort of talk at Underhill Wood with a decent number of people. And so this was another way of educating people and getting people sort of baseline knowledge about what the hell's going on with our biome. Mm-hmm. And then I guess a call to arms often those talks about what people could individually do. Mm-hmm. And then there was also this thing about, I'm not sure proving is the right word, but illustrating that with 25 acres you can make a difference, for species. I'm not saving the planet here in terms of endangered and rare British species in any way, but it just an illustration. If you let land gently rewild and regenerate and renature, you can make things happen. And interestingly, all those things have happened, and they continue. I've got a John Muir Award session this week, and we're looking at seasonal change from summer to spring to summer. So it's interesting how, as I say, what is it now? Nearly 7 years on, all those sort of thought bubbles that I had in 2013, they've all stood the test of time. They've sustained. So.
And perhaps, I mean, you talk about the kind of how nature's declining and how it's under pressure. I mean, how bad is the picture in the UK? If let's start with the kind of negative story, I guess, which and we can move on to how people can affect change and positive
bad
things happen. Yeah, but it's pretty bad.
It's pretty bad in the UK. My numbers are, these are rough numbers. I could go out to my office and get my little printout with this. There's something in the IUNC, which is a body that looks at overall global biodiversity and natural health. They do an international index every year of something like 214 countries.
Mm-hmm.
There are only 28 countries below the UK, so we're 186th. So we're right at the bottom, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know, we're in the basement in terms of biodiversity health in the UK. So the UK does very, very, very poorly, you know, and it continues to go backwards. You know, there's a number of species under pressure in this country at the moment. So we don't do well.
I mean, it's in simple terms. I mean, I guess it's not a simple question, and there are all sorts of factors at play here, Jonathan. But in sort of top line terms, are you able to say why? I mean, you know, we pride ourselves, we're supposedly a country of animal lovers, and but does that extend to sort of nature, or is that just puppy dogs and cats? I mean, what's going on here? What's at play, and what are the historical factors that have got the UK into such a degraded position in terms of our biodiversity?
Man, that's a big question. You know, it really is a huge question. I think I said to you in an earlier conversation in 1862, Karl Marx, you know, this really goes a long way back. In 1862, Karl Marx, with a German soil scientist, a guy called Liebberg, they pinpointed a thing they call British high farming as a real threat. If this model of farming in the middle of the Industrial Revolution was going to be exported to the world, they both wrote about the potential, you know, impacts of that. So, you know, the UK industrialized farming. I've just read a fantastic book called Rewilding by Ben MacDonald. He pinpoints the Enclosures Acts. You know, so pre-enclosures, we had this extraordinarily sort of wild series of habitats and ecosystem. So the industrial revolution hits and things begin to change.
Mm-hmm.
I think that I don't know because I haven't studied it. The decline probably begins sort of around about, you know, then as we get this industrialized agriculture, and then it's ramped up with the Second World War. Isabella Tree's very good in this in her book Wilding about the shifts that happen around both wars. So you get that period from sort of early 1900 through to sort of, you know, 1950, 1960, that sort of window, those 50 years where things really begin to shift with, you know, farms forced into a particular type of intensive agriculture. And what comes with that is really significant shifts in the way that our terrestrial environment is managed. And you know, if you then sort of extrapolate that out, the UK was one of the countries that brought industrial processes to things like whaling very early. You know, so the Industrial Revolution here drove lots of those shifts. And we sort of continue apace. You know, there is some redress. Regen Ag is getting a foothold. Where I live, there is a farm cluster scheme where farmers are collaborating and putting in contiguous habitats to encourage particularly pollinators and invertebrates. So there is a shift, but you know, we're still dominated by pretty big industrial farm concerns. They aren't environmentally friendly. They're efficient.
Yeah. But I guess as well, relatively short term in their outlook and in the way that they manage the land. And I guess something that we've been really keen on throughout Planted is to try and involve as many people in the conversation of how we move from a position where I think universally people recognise it's not great, it's not good, to move people together to shift the dial on this conversation. I mean, what kind of conversations do you have around farmers in your area? Obviously, you are this incredible sort of natural reserve, but you're tucked in amongst basically big agricultural, big farms, essentially. I mean, What are the conversations that you have, and is there pushback that you have because you're not, using the land in a productive way, as some people would see?
So yeah, a couple of responses to that. One, I think there's a general awareness of, despite the fact that I am surrounded by farms, there is a general awareness that that bit of North Dorset, Southwest Wiltshire, is pretty unproductive land. I'm on really heavy clay. It's difficult to farm. So I think there's an acknowledgement that this is marginal, right? So I'm not taking sort of prime arable. I'm not taking 25 acres of prime arable land out of production. It's also the fact I'm small. I'm not 2,000 acres, right? So I might have more pushback if I was, if I was of that scale. So I think there's something about that which is in play. The contacts I have had with farmers is they're sort of in some respects unwitting. There's an unwittingness about this, right? Where the farming community has been advised and guided by individuals from large industrial organizations that don't necessarily have a concern for the environment and ecology. Mm-hmm. So one of the things that I'm finding with that is the farmers I've had contact with, farmers know a lot about farming, but they don't know much about ecology. But then why would they? It's a sort of funny expectation that they would, because it's not the thing that's going to get them growing more wheat or more beef animals or producing more milk. Is a deep understanding of ecology. So one of the things that I had a visit last week. Was it last week? I think it was last week, by a dairy farmer. And the really interesting thing that came from that visit was just the lack of ecological knowledge, like sort of close to zero. And that really struck me. But then if you reflect on that, why would it be any different? Mm. What this individual knew a lot about was how to get more milk production out of their cows, because that's their job, right? And they're not advised by ecologists. They're advised by people who have an interest in milk production. Mm-hmm. So I think it's interesting. I think there's that the environment has given rise to a particular set of mindset within the farming community, but then why would that be any different? It's what they do. It's sort of asking a mechanic to understand, I don't know, brain surgery. It's not their job. Mm. I'm not sure that analogy particularly works, but you get my point.
I get the point, definitely. And so I guess there's huge education piece to be done here, but across, from the whole of society, I guess, about the paucity of UK biodiversity, the extreme pressure that nature has been placed under within this country for all manner of reasons. But lots of it due to the demand that we place on farmers through the food that we want all the time, quickly and cheaply. Cheap food, exactly. And I guess how little we're prepared to spend on our food as our overall budget in a house, I guess, as well, is something else that we could think about seriously. But coming back to Underhill, and I was really taken by the interview that you gave to the BBC Radio 4 programme around Christmas time, I think it was. And just listening to that interview and just sort of, you walked around the reserve, and then I had the privilege of coming down and spending some time down there a couple of weeks ago with my daughter Ella, who absolutely loved it. Can you just tell us a little bit about what goes on there, Jonathan? What are the species that do live in that environment, and indeed what else might come in the future, and what have you seen there in the past?
Mm-hmm. So we spent a long time. I spent a long time looking for land. I spent a couple of years trying to find the right piece of land. And one of the things that works at Underhill Wood is the bones were already there. So the bones to create a set of sort of mosaic habitats, that was already there. So it had a decent block of sedge marsh. It has a stream. It has a woodland. It had some pasture. So I could see sort of almost from the moment I stepped out of the car that this, as opposed to other bits of land that I'd been to see, I could see that this piece of land had the building blocks, and I could gently manipulate things and I guess leverage more out of that sort of, out of those bones, out of that structure. And So the things that I've done, or we have done since we've owned it, is I guess the single biggest. I talk about it as flicking an ecological switch. The single biggest thing we did was we built a pretty big lake. Um, Given the sort of where it sits in the land, we couldn't have gone much bigger. It's 190 odd meters long and 30 odd meters wide. And I built that in conjunction with the Dragonfly Society. They gave me input and advice into that. And so that having a big water body on the land, that draws in lots and lots of species. There's hobby which hunt there in the summer now. Good assemblage of dragonflies, amazing. The numbers of newts, frogs and toads have just increased exponentially in the time we've been there. The toad count this March was 120 toads one evening in the water.
Wow.
Because they have sort of nocturnal behaviors. Been massive grass snake population as a result of, again, because of the lake, because suddenly grass snakes, which weren't present, or certainly weren't present in numbers when I first bought the land. Grass snakes now have, they've got prey species, right? You know, toads, frogs, and newts.
Mm-hmm.
So that had a major impact. And then just the other, it's interesting, I've just written a manual about how to rewild. And in the manual, at some point, I write about sort of thinking like an auric. Getting your mindset into, if I'm going to try to create a sort of a series of habitats that in some way replicate a sort of prehistoric landscape that you might have found in the Blackmore Vale, what would that look like? So my interventions are very gentle. I do them sort of little and often, but I've sort of done things like created 2 meadows which provide prey species for barn owls and kestrels. In the woodland, we've taken out significant numbers of trees. The woodland was about a 30-year-old plantation woodland, very overplanted, heavily planted, lots of diseased trees. I've created butterfly glades. I've created internal woodland pond. I've created bug glades. I've created additional rides, got light in, got space in. Butterfly count, when we first started at the land, sort of rough butterfly count was about 10 species. We're now up to about 17 species. In my part of the world where the land is, a butterfly count of 21 species is considered to be excellent. So and all these things, you know, last winter I had the most amazing flocks of field fares and redwings, just incredible, just extraordinary and blackbirds wintering, because I've conservation hedge laid the hedges and allowed the hedges to sort of just take their natural form. So the hedges have been, you know, again, it's the thinking like an auric thing. We know, how do I get this thing as a proxy? How do I get it back to that sort of prehistoric landscape as close as I possibly can? And we're making progress. And it's just, as I say, it's just really, really interesting watching the hobby as a classic. You know, I talk to naturalists who live in and around me. No one had seen a hobby in that area for years and years and years. And it's now, this last year was the second summer we had a hobby hunting over on a regular basis.
Fantastic.
And they're amazing birds. They're just extraordinary to watch. I don't know whether you know, but they predate on dragonflies.
Okay.
And they're amazing. They're just extraordinary. So, you know, it's interesting as these gentle manipulations occur and as these little habitats develop. We get snipe now, winter over each year in the sedge marsh. Again, that wasn't that wasn't the case when I bought the land. So it's just interesting as you allow these and sort of enable to develop these species. They come.
Yeah, it's remarkable, isn't it, to think, you know, what is around, but they're somehow finding a way. And that's something that is really interesting for me, despite all the road networks and the big stretches of fields with very little cover for animals to move around. But there are some discussions, I believe, about, you know, which I know you're not specifically involved in, but it's just interesting to hear that perhaps, you know, there are conversations going on around how to enable wildlife networks and sort of pathways to to carry on. I mean, is that really the key to enabling nature in a big way to sort of start having a conversation amongst other people who are doing the same thing and try to connect these spaces?
Yeah, completely. Yeah, absolutely, Sam. So it's all about size, isn't it? It's all about scale. And if you can get big contiguous bits of land, albeit that you've got lots of smaller pieces of land, but they are connected in some way. It's one of the things that enables Underhill Wood to slightly punch above its weight, because I think it does. The species roll call is pretty impressive. Is the fact that I'm connected to my north, so to the north of the land, is, I'm never quite sort of sure how much, 40 to 60 acres, something in that range, of land that's been sort of left. And it's just sort of going, it's naturally rewilding. It could do with some little intervention. It could do with a couple of aurochs, but the fact that I'm connected to that, and then to my east, I've got a new neighbor who is going to do some form of regenerative agricultural rewilding, and they've got 50 to 60 acres.
Okay.
So when you get these contiguous bits of land, for obvious reasons, you've got scale. And there is a project in the air at the moment that from sort of Shaftesbury North and then Shaftesbury South, the young ecologist wants to map all these smaller rewilding projects, and then get farmers who have farms that sit between these projects to then create corridors. And so if we can get all these things connected within that sort of, in that, she's using a postcode, a rough postcode as her sort of locus, then you've got this idea of contiguous landscapes.
And that's really, and I guess, and there are some subsidies now, the elm subsidy and things like that, that are going to enable farmers and encourage farmers, presumably, to actually have evidence and actual biodiversity and on their farms, so that it kind of makes sense on both sides now, doesn't it?
Yeah, completely. I don't know. I haven't studied elms closely, but from what the farmers tell me, one of my neighboring farmers where I live, not at the land, but where I live, he's one of the pilots, so he's in the pilot program, and they are going to be compelled. There's the subsidy regime. It's this idea of public money for public good, right? So the subsidy regime is going to be completely connected to farmers running ecological schemes. So it's interesting. The farmers who are coming to me now and are visiting the land are coming because there's an imperative, right? They need to be learning about these. How do I conservation hedge lay? What do I do with the bit of woodland I've got? How do I slacken my hedge management? I've got an old pond that's not been touched for 50 years. What might I do with that? So yeah, there's lots and lots of questions coming from that community now about how do I bring more of these ecological sort of services and habitats into my farm? And that's good. It's a good thing. And it's engaging the farming community.
No, it's really positive, and there's a feeling. I believe that the kind of rewilding movement seems to be gaining traction, and at Planted we're really keen to showcase what people like you are doing, Jonathan, and also showcasing really good examples of restorative farming and good farming practice, of which there's so much out there. And we obviously support a reconnection with nature across our land, because that's very much what we stand for. I guess something else that we very much believe in is the idea that you can enable nature in whatever size space that you live in or you live around. And I guess with projects you talked about Isabella Tree earlier on, but the NET project has obviously caught a huge amount of attention. It's on an epically big scale. You've brought things down to 25 acres, which is obviously more manageable than NET, which you're talking several thousand. But even 25 acres for the majority of people is still a huge space, and kind of beyond comprehension. So if we could bring it down even more to just, if someone has a flat or a small balcony, a windowsill, or just a small terrace, what can people do on a really more manageable, comprehensible level, Jonathan, just to enable nature in their environment?
Well, if I made this point, you mentioned the BBC radio program. I made this point in the BBC radio program in the new year, which was broadcast in the new year. If I think about the village I live in, right, collectively, that village has got 600 acres, something like that. If all the people in the village I lived in gardened differently,
Mm-hmm.
of those 600 acres, you might have 400 wilded. And that's a significant piece of land.
Mm-hmm.
That's a big enough piece of land to then sustain a range of species. I think I said to you before we began the interview, I went for a long bike ride yesterday. Just depressing sort of management of gardens. I cycled past. In fact, I cycled past the guy on my way out, and then cycled past on the way back, him mowing sort of to about 3 or 4 mil, a 4-acre field with a ride-on mower. That field has no ecological value, none, zero, nothing. It doesn't even have a single flowering plant on it. So that man, whoever he is, could take 3.5 of those 4 acres and do something with it. Dig a pond, let some bramble, plant some gorse, plant a small woodland, just let some of it regenerate. So all of the interesting thing, you're right about NEP. You can bring this down to one of my John Muir Award kids went home and negotiated with his parents to take half the garden. And I think half the garden it's tiny. It's a tiny space. And him and his dad over a weekend, they went out and bought some pond lining. They built a little pond. He bought some gorse. He's gone and planted a couple of hawthorn plants, and he's now got slow worms, dragonflies, newts, toads, frogs, grass snakes. He's got everything that I've got at Underhill Wood in the half garden. And it's this, I've been up there. It's amazing. He's got his little sheets of tin out for his grass snakes and slow worms. And so, you can do this on any scale. It's just about, there's an interesting point here, actually. I thought about this riding yesterday and seeing the man pathetically mowing his 4-acre field. It's about tidy, right? It's about a sensibility. That's what stops people. It's like, I need to have my 4-acre field looking tidy. And if I have 3.5 acres looking a bit unruly, that doesn't fit with my view of the world.
Or what might people think of him, indeed.
And what people might think of him. So I get people come to the land and ask me, how am I going to control the grass? So it's moving away from that mindset and that sensibility of having to control and having things neat and having things ordered. And because that's not nature, right? Nature's not ordered. It's not neat. It's not controlled. It's unruly. And then there's finding beauty in that unruliness. That's a block. That's a really significant block for people.
I think that's such a fascinating point to end on, Jonathan. The changing, how do we change people's perception of beauty? That's such a control and tidy isn't necessarily beautiful, and barren deserts aren't necessarily beautiful. So one place I very much hold dear in my heart now, even after just one visit, is the undoubtedly and undeniably beautiful Underhill Reserve. It's really is a special place that you've created, Jonathan, and it's a testament to you and your wife's work that you have created such a wonderful haven. So congratulations from me, and thank you for your time today. It's been fabulous having you on the programme today. Jonathan Thomson from Underhill Wood Nature Reserve. Thank you for your time.
Sam, thank you. Very, very good. Enjoyed it. Good fun.
Well, it just leaves it for me to say that if you've enjoyed today's series of Planted on Earth, please subscribe to our YouTube channel, details of which can be found on our website, www.planted-cities.co.uk. On there, you'll find more great editorial content from some of the leading thinkers on design and sustainability, as well as exciting news about Planted's flagship event in London, which will be taking place at King's Cross from September the 23rd to the 26th. Watch out too for news of our exciting Planted Members Club, which will be launching very soon. And that just leaves it for me to say thanks again to Jonathan from Underhill Wood Nature Reserve. Thanks to Horticus Living for styling our set, and thanks to you for watching. My name's Sam Peters, and this has been Planted Unearthed.